Well, Donald Trump has introduced his much anticipated reciprocal tariff plan on Liberation Day on Wednesday. Now, Donald Trump is looking to upend the current status quo in the world economy. There's no doubt about that. We have a lot to dive into today, from trade to the Dow Jones Industrial Average. We have a lot. And the players that Donald Trump has been driving to the negotiating table. But before we get into it, drop down below, hit that subscribe button. Don't ever miss another video again from us in the future. Now, I want to start and preface this by saying I 100% believe in free trade. I do not believe that countries should use tariffs solely to boost domestic productions of goods and services. It's as simple as that. Tariffs should be used for two things: leverage and national security purpose. You need to protect certain domestic industries for national security purposes. For example, we cannot be reliant on China for our chips. We just can't be. We can't be reliant on an adversary for products that are mandatory when it comes to our national security. If there is a supply chain break, it could set the United States back. We could lose a war if we had to go to war with China next week. The supply chains where they currently are right now leave the United States in a very vulnerable position. But the idea of what Donald Trump is doing and what he announced on Liberation Day, the idea of it, maybe not some specifics, but the idea of it is something that I support. What we have, or what we've had in the world, was not free trade. We had that the United States was engaging in free trade with other partners. We were the free trading partner to many other countries, but they weren't engaged with free trade with us. If we truly had free trade, American products would not be barred from entering so many markets across the world. Look at Asia. How many American-made cars do you see in Asia? Why is it that the United States should have zero barriers to enter our market to sell products from other countries, but American products are not treated the same way? Even if there aren't direct duties that are put on imports that come into the United States or go into another country from the United States, there are regulations that prevent the United States from introducing their goods and services to that market. If there are regulations or really non-tariff barriers that do not allow an American company to compete the same way, let's say a Japanese or Chinese company competes in the American market, that's just totally not fair. Now, Donald Trump has focused a lot on the trade deficit with other countries. And while I believe it is important that with other large economies, we should have a relatively balanced trade, but also it's just not as simple as that. There's so much that goes into it. I think that we should work towards having balanced trade, but just the idea that we don't have balanced trade or have a deficit isn't really a big deal. It is more important that American products can be sold there, not necessarily that the deficit. If American products can be sold there, there isn't barriers to entry, and there's a deficit, that's one thing. But if there's a deficit due to trade barriers, due to tariffs, then we have an issue there. Like I said, especially if they have barriers that they put on our products, because the deficit alone isn't an emergency. Trump may say it's an emergency, but it's not. The deficit alone with another country is not. But also a deficit doesn't exist in a vacuum. It doesn't exist in this little perfect little box where everything else is a constant variable. You know, the reality is if there are no trade barriers or anything else that prevents the United States products from getting into another market, maybe there just isn't demand for that product in their economy. Maybe there isn't demand for the product that we're selling at the price we're selling it. There's a lot of factors, and that's just basic economics. But if another country has barriers for our products, it 100% should be addressed. If we have free trade for them, if China can dump their products in our market for relatively no tariff or no trade barriers, but then we go to put our products in their market, and then all of a sudden, whoa, there's all these trade barriers and tariffs in place that prevents Americans and American goods and products from reaching those markets. That's not okay, and that needs to be addressed. Free trade must go both ways. This is not a one-way street. They must go both ways. But here's the reality when it comes to trade with China. We were sold, the American people, we were sold a lie by our politicians. Years and years ago, we were sold this lie that if we integrated economies with China, we would lose manufacturing jobs to China, but that our economy would become more sophisticated, and they really try to downplay the amount of jobs we were going to lose. It's like we've expected to, or from like 2000 to 2012, we lost between 1 to 2 million manufacturing jobs in the United States because of open relationships with China. And that, on its face value, I don't think is a horrible thing. I think it's bad in a lot of ways. I think it's all nuance. You have to look at the specifics of each situation. But we were told that our economy would become more sophisticated and that American culture would be spread to China. So first, they lied to us. They said that we wouldn't lose as many manufacturing jobs as we did lose. We lost 1 to 2 million just in the first decade, after we really normalized and cemented our trade and status with China. That's just the reality of that situation. When we normalized trade relations in 2000 under Bill Clinton, like October of 2000, where we no longer had to renew a specific trade status that China had, where they were kind of the highest, we were going to give them the best trade deals that we possibly could. But they sold us this lie that American culture would spread to China, when the exact opposite has happened. China's culture has spread to the United States. Their communist propaganda has seeped into the minds of young Americans. Meanwhile, the United States has become dependent on China for critical supply chains that affect national security in the United States. You know, if we make t-shirts in China or t-shirts in Vietnam, who cares? I really don't care. Are t-shirts a national security issue? No. But if we make sophisticated microprocessing chips that are made in China, that where 90% of them are made in Taiwan, which is basically under China's control. And I think it was kind of neat in those reciprocal tariffs. It was kind of cool to see that Trump, let's see if we can find his little board that he was holding. But on his little board that he had Taiwan as a separate country on there. I thought that was just neat. Just to begin with, let's just be honest about this. Taiwan is its own country. It is not a part of China. As much as China wants to bring it all back together, the CCP, they want everything. But that's just not how it's going to work. It's just not. The reality is that American culture did not spread to China. Chinese culture spread to the United States. Meanwhile, we have become more dependent on China for the critical resources, for rare earth minerals, for microchip processors. And that is a huge national security issue. And that's why something must be done about this. Now, we know the stock market has taken a beating the last 2 days. Taken a pretty big beating. We've seen that the Dow Jones Industrial Average has basically erased all of its gains that it had over the last year. Basically, it's about even from where it was about a year ago. A little bit less. About half a percentage point lower. And here's the issue, is that this is all... The reason the stock market is dropping is because it's all predicated on this notion that Trump's tariffs are not reciprocal, that Trump wants to actually implement tariffs and try and prop up U.S. production, which will ultimately lead to lethargic and slower growth in the United States. And we have a lot of issues. We have national debt issues where our economy needs to grow. If we want to outgrow, we have a lot of debt that is maturing in 2026 that we are going to have to refinance. We're going to have to issue new bonds in order to cover that debt because we can't afford to pay that right now. And the reality is we have to do that. But in order for us to pay down our debt, we need to grow our economy. We cannot tax our way out of this. It's just not, we do not have a revenue issue in the United States. We have a spending issue. We need to stop spending money, and our economy needs to outgrow what our national debt is. We need to outgrow the rate at which our national debt is growing at. Because the reality about tariffs is that tariffs as a general economic policy will drive up costs, create lethargic industries over the long run, and that's really just due to no competition. This is the great example. If you're an insurance agent, and there's one insurance agent in your town, everybody has to come to you to do business with you. It doesn't matter if you don't pick up the phone. It doesn't matter if you don't reply to emails. It doesn't matter if you don't do what you're supposed to do. You're a bad insurance agent. There's only one insurance agent in town. They'd have nowhere else to go. But if there's 10 insurance agents now in this town, now you are forced to innovate. You're forced to be better. Your customer service is forced to be better. You're forced to be on top of the ball. Because if you're not, your customers are going to go to your competitors. And that is the same thing that will happen with tariffs as a general economic policy. Industries that are subsidized by the government, industries that are protected from foreign competition, are going to become lethargic. They no longer are going to have those pressures of competition that drive innovation in the United States and across the world. That will be a huge issue. And the reality is that the Trump administration needs to do a better job when it comes to messaging that these are not permanent tariffs. These are reciprocal tariffs. Well, you need to be stern. These are reciprocal tariffs, and they are going to stay on until we negotiate a deal. But to say that they are permanent, like Trump has talked about leaving these on forever. He even has said he will never change. The tariff policies will never change. I hope that means that the tariff policies of reciprocal tariffs will never change. And something that I really have an issue with is the actual specifics about this. You know, we want to look at the chart here. And I'm just going to find, we are going, let's see. Right here. This is my issue. These tariffs charged to the United States have nothing to do with the actual tariff that's being charged. It has nothing to do with it. This reciprocal rate is calculated based on trade imbalances, which is about half of the tax burden. So it basically is you're taking the trade deficit divided by imports. That's basically what you have here. Because the reality is let's find, where are they? Israel, right? They're charging us 33%. No, they're charging us 0 right now. They just removed all of their tariffs. Why is Israel still on here? Vietnam has already said, like, these are not the actual rates that we are being charged. The actual tariff rate with China is closer to like 30 or 40%. It is not 67%. Vietnam's is not 90%. This has nothing to do with the actual tariff that is being charged. And that's my issue here, is if the only way that this tariff being charged to the United States can go down is if these countries buy more American products, which ultimately we want them to do. But that's not free trade. If we force them to buy our products, that is going to be an issue, and then the tariffs will never come down. If you are going to roll out reciprocal tariffs, it needs to be rooted in facts. This is not factual information when it comes to the actual tariffs that are being charged to the United States. This is a lie. This is not factual information. This is setting the United States up for failure. Because if this is how we're going to judge countries, then I understand why the market is reacting so poorly to this. Why the Dow is down 2,000 points at this point. Because they actually don't believe that this is reciprocal tariffs. They believe that this has to do with trade imbalances, which is not the same as tariffing or putting burdens or duties on American products or stopping American products from being sold in their market. It is two completely different things. Two completely different things. And the Trump administration needs to do better. I voted for reciprocal tariffs. I did not vote for reciprocal tariffs rooted in factual inaccuracies. This information is inaccurate. I agree with the overall idea of what is happening here. But the actual numbers that are on here are false. They are not true. I agree it is a smart negotiating tactic to say that these tariffs are going to be permanent, because then other countries are forced to approach the negotiation table with the United States. But the reality is people on Wall Street are uncertain about what Trump is going to do. Business leaders want certainty. Business leaders want to know what they're going to have to pay for a product that they need to, let's say they're buying aluminum or steel. They need to know. They like to have that a constant. They do not like fluctuations. They want to know what the tax rate they're going to pay. They want to know what the regulations are going to have to be. People, business owners, investors want certainty, and that is something we do not have, and the Trump administration needs to do better. Because we know a bad economy will wreck a presidency. A bad economy is what wrecked Joe Biden's presidency, or at least kept it down. You could say that Afghanistan is really what hurt them up front, but it's very, very true to say that the economy is what kept the Biden administration down. You look at Jimmy Carter. What ruined Jimmy Carter's administration? Inflation, a bad economy. A bad economy will ruin any presidency. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican, Democrat, how large a support you have. And I want to address a certain notion that is being kind of tossed around about Wall Street and Main Street and the connection between the two. Many people on the right now are claiming that the stock market dropping is only going to affect the wealthy and the 1%. That most Republicans, it actually isn't going to affect them. which is the most BS thing I've ever heard in my life. This is the most insane thing because it is 100% false. 60% of Americans own stocks through their retirement accounts. To pretend that the market drop-in does not matter to Main Street, to pretend like there's this large disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street, yes. Is there a disconnect? Absolutely. But to exacerbate and to lie about where that disconnect actually exists is political suicide. There are a lot of Republicans, business owners, it's like, yes, are there a lot of people who don't own stocks? Yeah, and that's a problem. You should be invested in your own financial security. And you do that by owning productive assets. That is how the rich get richer. They take their excess cash and they put it into a productive asset that produces more money. And when that asset produces more money, they put it once again back into an asset, a productive asset. It is a complete lie that this is only going to affect the rich. This is going to affect everyday Americans. This is going to affect nurses who have 401ks. This is going to affect people in unions. This is going to affect the tradesmen, pipe fitters who have 401ks, who have pensions. This is going to affect, plumbers, any people in the unions or the trades that have 401ks or retirements. That is going to affect them. For the same reason when you had the dumbass Tim Walz celebrating about Tesla stock dropping, meanwhile the state of Minnesota owned close to 2 million shares in their retirement and non-retirement investment accounts. It is that same insanity, that out-of-touch insanity that we are seeing from people on the right. And it is political suicide to espouse the ideas that they're espousing here. But we must also understand that it will take time for economies and businesses to adjust to this approach that Donald Trump has taken to the economy. But all I ask of the Trump administration, give us some clarity, give us some certainty on this. Give us a clear cut, here are the tariffs. Here are the tariffs that the United States is going to put, that you have in the United States. If you lower them, we need to get to zero. They need to do a better job of showing that their actual goal is to get to zero tariffs. That should be our ultimate goal. We cannot be going out saying and lying in these numbers here. You can't lie about it. Because then at the end, when they do reduce tariffs to zero, we're still going to have a tariff on them based on the standard that they have set. So this must be corrected immediately. And the fact that why is Israel getting a tax? I'm not this huge supporter of Israel like some people are, but it's like, but it's just because they removed tariffs a couple days before this happened. They removed all the tariffs. Why are you putting tariffs on them? They removed a lot of their non-tariff barriers to entry into the Israeli market, which were pretty low to begin with, but still. But something that the GOP can do to counter this. Now, I believe what Trump is doing, the reciprocal tariff plan, is a great idea. It is exactly what we need to help reduce the barriers for American products to enter other economies. But something the GOP can do to what would you say, adjust, something the GOP can do to counter these negative effects that come with tariffs, it all has to do with this reconciliation bill. And I guess the appropriations bill later this year. But this is what the tariffs make this reconciliation bill so much more important. It makes it so important that Congress must pass a bill that will make the Trump tax cuts permanent and extend them even further than they were in 2017. And continue to deregulate our economy to unleash American independence, unleash American prosperity, unleash American independence or energy independence, unleash the power of the American economy through deregulation. And the only way that you can do that is by passing a reconciliation bill that enshrines Trump tax cuts into law, it extends them even further, and deregulates our economy. Our economy is currently held back by the massive liberal regulations and red tape that were instituted during the Biden administration. The Biden administration took a great idea, the CHIPS Act. And let's pull it up here real quick. The CHIPS and Science Act, which basically authorized roughly $280 billion in new funding to boost domestic research and manufacturing of semiconductors in the United States for chip manufacturing, along with a 25% investment tax credit for cost of manufacturing equipment and $13 billion for semiconductor research and workforce training. That's great. That's a great idea. It's exactly what Trump is talking about. And this was passed during Biden. But I'll tell you how the Biden administration totally screwed it up. Totally screwed it up. Because the idea was to make sure that America is not reliant on China. We need to counter this reliance, our supply chain reliance on China when it comes to rare earth minerals, when it comes to pharmaceuticals. And pharmaceuticals doesn't really have to do with this act necessarily, but ultimately these, highly sophisticated semiconductors is exactly what the United States needs. We cannot be reliant on China for that. But what did the Biden administration do? They regulated it to death, where basically very little funds have been dispersed from this. Because in order to receive some of this money, you have to hit certain diversity quotas. Equity, you have to submit equity plans into the federal government. There's probably 30 or 40 regulations in place that have to do with DEI, that have to do with equity planning that these companies had to meet, which is just total BS. You took a great idea and you regulated it to death using DEI initiatives. Oh, you have to have so many women in the workforce. You have to have so many underrepresented minorities in the workforce. No, I want the person who can do the job the best. That's who I want in the workforce. I don't care if they're black, transgender, a woman, or from South Africa. I do not care. I do not care. I want someone who's going to be the best at what they're doing. That is what I care about. And this is how the Democrats, they're so bad. They took a great idea in the Chips and Science Act and then just regulated it to death. Regulated the hell out of it. And then there's huge red tapes. And this is just one example of what they did. Just one example of what they did. Because the reality is we do not want these tariffs to last a very long time. And we can already see that countries are coming to the negotiating table to make a deal with the American government. Look at what's happening with Canada. There's plenty here. We have, even from the UK, this is recent, since I started recording. UK Prime Minister seeks new trade deal with the United States to remove tariffs. Told you so. That's exactly. The idea of reciprocal tariffs works. It 100% works. This is, you look at Canada. Canada has actively been negotiating with the United States. Mexico actively negotiating with the United States. Vietnam, they were facing a steep 46% reciprocal tariff. 46% reciprocal tariff. Now, Vietnam has reportedly called the Trump administration directly to initiate negotiations. This aligns with what we need to do to safeguard exports. This is what we need to do. You look at Argentina. Argentina will probably be the first country that we formalize an actual deal with in the aftermath to this. But then you look at Israel, Japan, South Korea, all of these, Taiwan, the European Union, they are all coming to the table. They are all doing what they need to do. And that is why reciprocal tariffs work. So that's going to wrap things up for today, folks. Catch you next time. Drop your thoughts down in the comments down below, and we will catch you.